Hello and welcome to the 15th episode of Season 2 of House, the Shared Living podcast. I'm Deanie Lee from the Property Marketing Strategists.
I'm Dan Smith from Resi Consultancy.
And I'm Sarah Canning from the Property Marketing Strategists.
First, a short word from our sponsor.
Housed, the Shared Living podcast, is sponsored by mystudenthalls.com, student accommodation search. Let's find your place.
So a big thank you to My Student Halls for sponsoring us. We couldn't bring the podcast to you without them. So if you haven't got your properties listed on them, do speak to the team and make sure you do that. So this was going to be the last episode of Season 2, where it's going to be a very special episode that we hand over to you, our lovely, loyal audience. But you gave us so many questions that I think we're going to have to split it into 2 episodes. So you're going to get the first part before Christmas, and then you'll be able to listen to the second part after Christmas. So part 1 will be this week, where you're trying to do the last minute Christmas shopping, which I'm sure we're all looking forward to. And then you can listen to the second part in the new year when you're over all the Christmas rush and practicing all your new presents and getting on with 2025. Yes, the new year is coming. In the spirit of fairness, we're going to be pulling out the names of a hat to decide what we answer and in what order. And we're going to try and answer them in 5 minutes because there are a lot of the topics that we've discussed previously over the podcast. So we don't want to get too deep. And obviously you can go back to all those lovely episodes we've recorded in 2024 to hear more about all of those topics. So I think we are ready to go. I think we all know what we're doing. I'm going to hand over to Sarah to let us know what question we're going to answer first.
So I have an actual hat and I have the names of all the people that have asked us questions in the hat. So I'm going to pull out the first name now. This is very, very technical. And we have the first question from Claire Massey from Shepherd Robson. Claire sent over a question over WhatsApp. And her question is, are we giving students what they need and want, or are we simply regurgitating the same design model we have had for the last 10 to 15 years? Much like the arrival of the ensuite product some time ago, is another design revolution or alternative way of thinking needed? So I'm going to click the timer. So we've got 5 minutes to answer that. Dan, do you want to go first? What are your thoughts?
I feel like the timer is specifically for me. I think that's why we. I think there's a reason that some students are choosing to live in BTR, and I think that is when we're talking about not reinventing ourselves, we're talking about PBSA, the PBSA sector, effectively. And I think that has definitely happened. It was, en suites and studios, and then actually studios make the numbers stack up better. You can get a higher number of studios in there. They are higher grossing. So why wouldn't you put studios in there to make the numbers stack up, especially when it's shooting fish in a barrel, when it's really, really easy to fill those beds? That is not the case now. And some students are choosing BTR because they like the space. They like the 1, 2, 3, 4 bed apartments. And I think that's something that PBSA needs to learn from. In terms of how that works with the economics and the viability, that makes it a lot more challenging for investors to get PBSA off the ground in particular. But I do think there's something that we need to learn. We also need to be looking at non-ensuite models, twin models, the 2DO model a bit more, like really making sure that we are creating non-homogeneous communities. We need diversity in our product range in PBSA across the board on a global level. We can't just keep building studios and long corridors of en-suites. And I do think that some developers and designers and architects are trying to change that model slightly, but there are some investors just looking for your traditional returns and the traditional model, and they don't particularly want to or need to change that in certain locations. But in some locations, they will definitely get found out. When the students start voting with their feet because they don't want the old studio product or they don't want the long corridors of en-suites, that will definitely happen.
I mean, I've never, ever liked the institutionalized design of PBSA. It's been a bugbear of mine ever since I joined the sector. And it was kind of one of my first comments when I was presented with the product and shown the product. And I think if there's a price differentiation and that it's cost effective to building that way, and that means that the price is more affordable to the student, then yeah, go for it, because you're providing a product that is meeting those needs. But I think what we're seeing now is actually there isn't that price differentiation. And therefore, why are we building this institutionalized home, for want of a better word, when we can be building something else? So for me, I think it comes down to actually what can be achieved with everything that makes up going into student accommodation for investors, for stakeholders. I think students have told us time and time again, by choosing BTR, they're telling us that actually the preference would obviously be a flat type scenario that we'd all expect in any kind of flat. And if PBSA can do that cheaper, and that means that it's going to be cheaper and it's a cheaper room, then do it. But that has to be the reason why you're choosing PBSA, because of a price differentiation, not the nice flat. So I'd go back to the drawing board and say, right, okay, what is the cheapest possible way we can build? If you can build it in a BTR way, build PBSA that way. If the payoff is actually, if we build BTR, it's going to be much more expensive, then try something else, I think is my answer. But
one thing, just very quickly, I promise I'll be super quick, Sarah. What about the HMO market as well? I think that's where BTR comes in and could be a real rival to HMO, or PBSA should be looking at those smaller apartment type buildings or, complexes where, students would typically go for an HMO, maybe a 4 or 5 bed HMO. And actually they can do that within PBSA and still have that freedom. But at the minute, it seems like BTR is stealing a march on that.
I think you both said the word home. And I think that's what's missing for me, really. And I think what we need to appreciate is that young people's lives have changed a lot, partly because of COVID, and I think partly because of technology. People are spending a lot longer in their rooms, in their flats, indoors, because they're not into drinking. The pubs are closing down. They haven't got that kind of party lifestyle. And therefore, the spaces that they're living in have to change. And if people are looking at HMOs and looking at BTR, it's because they feel like a home. We do get told a lot that PBSA can't do what BTR does because of fire safety, because of layouts, because of all of the accreditation. So I'd expect someone like Claire, an architect, to come and kind of tell us why that is, or where it could be challenged. Because if BTR are doing it, why can't PBSA?
Yeah, I agree. And I do think that was a problem on the Property Week panel that you guys had with all the students. There was a real lack of understanding about PBSA, and I think, I know that 2 of them said PBSA just doesn't really feel like a home, whereas an HMO, you feel like you can kind of make that your home. So I do think that's something to be very mindful of.
I think the other thing that we've challenged before as well, we're over time, so I'm going to make this super quick, is it doesn't feel like in a PBSA flat that your home starts at the front door. The front door should be the front door. Your hallway should be your home. And it doesn't. It feels like your home is your room. And, like nobody wants to live in a 13 square metre room and feel like they're visiting the kitchen, which is inevitably what you got. So I think for me, that's kind of the reinvention that needs to be had. Right, should we have the next question? That was fantastic. I'm reaching into my hat. And the next question is from Laura Matthews. We do have a voice note from Laura. So let's listen to Laura's question.
Hi House team, it's Laura Matthews here from Epoch Rebel. The question that I had was around when are people going to become part of the agenda at these conferences, these student accommodation conferences. I attended the Property Week student accommodation conference a couple of weeks ago, and I was shocked that, with the exception of Stuart Henderson, who happened to talk about pay not being high enough, there was absolutely no discussion whatsoever around how we can make working conditions better, improve career progression for the people that work in our properties. They have an absolutely monumental job to do. It's a really tough job that they have to do, and I'd like to know when people are going to be put onto the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. That's a very valid question. I know we were questioning it ourselves after Property Week. Like we said, we feel like there are some parts of the sector that now have a platform, but we're still not really hearing from HR about people. I think it's coming. I think if there's enough pressure, the same way that Deanie and I put pressure on organisers to talk about marketing, I think if the people put pressure on these organisers and have something to say, maybe some data to back it up, I think it will come, because she's right, there's a big gap. When you're hearing from investors and developers all the time, you miss the human part of it. We talked about burnout the other week, and that's not really talked about, the pressures that the staff are under, and the pay as well. And it comes back to returns, doesn't it? That PBSA gets great returns for investors because it operates on a small staffing plan. So what do you guys think?
I think Laura's absolutely right. I think that actually people need to be on the agenda. And I think if investors don't think it should be on the agenda, then that doesn't make any sense, because it is one of their biggest costs that they have. So if they don't actually understand that, and they understand the role that those people play in that building, and that actually if you have a more efficient approach to kind of recruiting, retaining, supporting those people to deliver better, then you're going to get a better outcome for your building. So it kind of makes sense, and it's smart to make sure that, you know, if you're investing in this sector, that you understand what your biggest cost is doing and how that works.
I think there just needs to be really clear guidelines as to what your job description is, what the expectations are, what the potential bonus plan is, how everything is communicated to you, what your personal development plan is, like what training are you going to undergo. It shouldn't just be that you're chucked into a role, or that you find yourself in a role and there's no support. You don't necessarily have a manager that can work with you to build your either profile or improve your role or whatever it might be. I don't think there's a huge amount of support from HR within a lot of these a lot of operators, and I would say that's operators large and small. Now, some of the more institutional operators, the likes of a Unite, of course, they'll have a huge people structure. But as that filters down to the more sort of private sector, I think that does get lost. I think there's a reason that the burnout post that I did resonated quite, and when we talked about it on the podcast, that resonated quite so much with people. I had so many messages from people who weren't necessarily happy to comment on that post, but they were saying, yes, this is rife. This is a massive problem. A couple of people within HR and a couple of people, very senior managers saying, we're noticing this. It's something that we're having to talk to our investors about, because it's not just the vertically integrated, it's the third party operators too. So that's definitely something I think we need to be mindful of. I don't think there's enough training in the sector. I think we need to improve the training. I know Ross Halliday's just launched Lesson Learned, which ultimately will be taking anyone in PBSA through various elements of training. So that's something to look at. But I think there needs to be much more of a focus on those people, whether it's getting investors in people, and there are some operators with it, or best places to work, things like that. That's where PBSA really needs to be getting on with that.
We do sales training, and one of the things that we bring into that is an understanding of the sector, and I feel like that's missing a lot. The people that work in the sector aren't really being given that opportunity to understand the wider world that they work within, and therefore if they understood that more, I think they would be better at their jobs, but they would also probably challenge their employer a little bit more, because they would understand what other parts of the sector there are and who they're competing against. The shared living sector, or even the real estate sector is a huge varied place with lots of different jobs and lots of different roles, and that's the first place that I would be looking if I was running a business, is to make sure that they have industry knowledge.
I'd also be looking at the pay. I do think that the pay is still an issue in PBSA. It's getting there. It's getting much better. But there's a lot of brain drain away from PBSA to BTR in particular, because BTR are able to pay more, and they do pay more on a site level and at HQ. Not necessarily masses in terms of the difference, but it's enough to probably, if you're looking for a career progression, you may well have your head turned by BTR. And I think that's something that PBSA certainly needs to watch. I've been calling that out on LinkedIn. There are two recruiters who have been putting on posts where the general manager for a property in a large city of about 400 beds or so, I think they're advertising it at 28k. That's too low. And so I called that out twice, and it instantly got deleted. The post instantly got deleted, and I said to them, you need to go back to whoever the client is and tell them that is far too low. Like, they really need to be pushing the clients. Like, it's not okay to just take on a mandate for a new job just because you need the money, even though that job is being advertised at too low a salary, and with no bonus, no benefits, nothing. So yeah, a bit of a shout out to the good recruiters who are giving that feedback to their clients, even when that feedback is not necessarily particularly well received. it's time to make sure that we are paying everybody fairly. And I think everybody should be signed up to the living wage. Every single student accommodation operator should be signed up to the living wage. Same for BTR too, because that makes sure that not just your GM is well looked after, because they will be above living wage, or at least they blooming should be, but through to the housekeeper, the maintenance teams, any kind of resident ambassadors, whatever it might be. Just make sure you are paying at least the living wage for all roles.
Before we move on, I just want to say as well that applies to head office staff. We see marketing teams incredibly stretched. I put a post out on LinkedIn a few weeks ago about the social media executive who, is a content creator, social media community manager, has to be, online 24/7, has to liaise with multiple staff, has to, strategize, has to schedule. That's not one job. And, I expect that role is seen as an entry-level role and is probably being paid in the early 20s. And that's not right. That's probably 3 people's roles. So I think, everybody needs to look at who's supporting the sector and make sure that they're being paid and supported fairly.
And I think this comes back to that you need to understand what these people are doing, because if you are paying a general manager 28 grand a year, you're not going to get an efficient building and it's not going to run efficiently. It's going to cost you more money in the long run. And I think that's why you've really got to understand what these people are doing, why they're doing it, and how getting the right people into those roles and paying them what they deserve will be so much more efficient for your business.
The salaries have increased in property level and HQ, so they are increasing, and that, of course, that means that the returns and the NOI shrinks. So we do need to make sure that investors are educated. That's the primary thing that we need to do as a sector: educate the investors on why you would need to pay your general manager a lot more than 28k if they're running a 400-bed building. They're curating that community. They are responsible for keeping your residents happy. So, yeah, I think that's definitely an education piece there.
Okay, next question. Into the hat I go. The next question comes from Kellyanne Watson. I think we've got a voice note from Kellyanne.
Hey, House Podcast. Thank you for asking my question today. I'm excited to hear about your response. I'm Kellyanne, Managing Director at the Class Foundation, calling/listening in today from Amsterdam. So my question is, what's an uncomfortable truth about PBSA that we're not talking about? And how can facing it help grow, develop and support the sector? Excited to hear your response.
Oh, that's really, really juicy. I have been thinking about it and I'm going to go for it. Okay, so what I think the uncomfortable truth about the sector is that I don't think students like it as nearly as much as investors, developers and operators think they do. I think it's a means to an end. I think it provides a bed space that they need in the city that they need. But I think that we are arrogant and short-sighted in thinking that it's good enough just to provide a room. And I think that, as we've discussed before, there are choices. PBSA is not the only choice. And if the operators don't double down on what makes a student building so fantastic, then there is no reason why a student would stay and not go to BTR or co-living. So I think that we need to take a long, hard look at ourselves. I think we need to really, really monitor what else is going on in the city, because there is choice. We've called out the headlines, for months on the podcast about how there is a shortage. We need to build, and the sector's so buoyant, and there's so much investor potential. But that is on the assumption that every single student wants to live in PBSA. Not only do they not, but they don't have to. So I just think that it's time for the sector to kind of really, a bit like what we said on the design, is kind of let's move forward, let's move with the sector, and really kind of, I guess, when the sector started, 30 years ago, it was new, it was exciting, it was something different. And I think, everyone's got a little bit lackluster and a little bit arrogant.
I think just to prove that point, Sarah, I think our student panel at Property Week didn't really understand PBSA, didn't really understand it was for them. So that kind of proves the point. If you are offering student accommodation for students, they should know about it. And they don't really. They don't know it's for them, and they don't know what it is, and they don't know what's special about it. So, just to back up what you're saying, I think that the proof is there, ultimately.
I agree with you. For me, I think the uncomfortable truth is that we are going to end up with quite a few stranded assets in 2030. And by that, I mean properties that we cannot fill with students, or properties that are not sustainable enough to be able to sell. And I think that's going to be a real problem. We've already seen, UCAS have rode back slightly on the journey to 1 million. So you won't see that again. It's the journey to 900,000, if that, by 2030, as in 900,000 applications a year. I'm not convinced it would hit that. I really hope it does, but we will see. From a sustainability standpoint, we are miles behind where we need to be. Genuinely, if Europe is anything to go by, and I think it is, we need to make sure that we are building much more sustainably. I look at people like Amro and Raj Kotecha and Ami Kotecha and the team there. They are blazing a trail. Their properties are BREEAM outstanding or BREEAM excellent at a time when so many people are just building to BREEAM very good, or some even BREEAM good. It is not that easy to build sustainably, especially when some investors like specific returns and that return profile is tight. And I think we genuinely are going to end up with a lot of stranded assets from a demand standpoint, either because we've built the wrong stock that students don't actually want in terms of, studios and long corridors of en suites. And that's fine for some, but I think that from a sustainability standpoint too, we will have stranded assets as well.
I guess my uncomfortable truth is, I think it links into your arrogance, Sarah, is that I think that the sector...
Not my arrogance.
Not your arrogance. Not your arrogance. Your point on arrogance is that I don't think the sector is looking to change. I think they're waiting for the market metrics to get better. And that is going to come back and bite them, and it's going to come back and bite them badly. And I think we are brave, we aren't being innovative, and we're not trying to see how we can make our product better. My general sense is the sector is waiting for the economy to get better, and they can go back to we will build it and then they will come. That's not going to happen. If you think that's going to happen, you don't have a business. So you're better off going and investing it elsewhere.
And I think some investors and developers are going to get found out in a very big way in some of these locations where the feasibility studies either have been done by sales agents who are invested in the sale of the property or a completion of a property, and they've not done particularly, any more due diligence. I think there are going to be some locations where that is a real struggle for them to move a building on, because the occupancy drops, then the revenue drops, and then, ultimately what councils want is for the occupancy to sit at around 80% as an average across a city for PBSA, so that the rents come down and everybody gets more competitive and we all start fighting a bit more. So people need to be prepared for that. There are some investors I already know that are very overexposed to some of those problems, and some of these banking covenants will get breached within the next 18 months, I would say. So that's going to be really interesting to see. If you haven't done enough due diligence with, from agencies outside of your typical sales agencies, then I think there could be a problem, and some of these properties may come unstuck.
I think we tackled Kellyanne's question head on there. So we have Dave Amor. So he, I believe, has left a voice note for Dan.
He has, yeah. Bear with me.
Hi, Dan. Dave Amor here from Higher Insights. Yeah, I had a question for you your podcast. I'm really interested to hear how student accommodation providers are using student recruitment data and market insight to adjust their own recruitment strategies and diversify, given the more challenging recruitment environment we're all facing at the moment.
Right. That's for those of you that don't know Dave Amor. He runs Higher Insights, so he deals with a lot of university recruitment data in particular. If you follow my LinkedIn, you'll have seen several reposts from Dave every month, because he's sharing that data, which is amazing. So do go and follow him. Now, I don't think that student accommodation operators are using data from higher education institutions anywhere near enough. The reason for that is that HESA data is crap. It's way too outdated. We've been waiting for 2 years for the right data, and then when that comes, it's still a year to 18 months out of date. Things are moving so quickly in higher education that we need a body that can keep up and provide real-time data. That's where the likes of Dave Amor and Mark Corver as well from Data HE, they can give a real insight into that. How's that university doing? What are the trends looking like? Are they shedding international students? Are they shedding international postgrads? Is it limited to Nigeria? Is it limited to India? And then you can effectively build your marketing campaign around that if you have that data in as real time as you possibly can. You've got the likes of Enrolly as well, which they're releasing more data as well on an ongoing basis. It's amazing. There is so much data out there. There are good enough providers to get that in almost real time. And some of those have to work really hard and hand in glove with the universities. PBSA, I think we're really lazy. I think for the fortunate few, like the UPPs, the Unites, the IQs, who have specific university relationship managers, they can get good insights, which is just a quick conversation. And that's what we do at Resi Consultancy. We will call the university international recruitment department or specific faculties and say, how are you looking? Not just the accommodation department. We will call the entire university faculties and say, right, okay, how's business studies looking? How's languages looking? How is whatever at medicine looking? And that is super important. So if you can get that data and it's, reliable from the likes of from Dave or Mark, for example, it's it is absolute gold dust. You can spot those trends a mile off. So well worth doing more research from universities, I think.
I think this comes back down to this collaboration piece, that actually universities need accommodation to attract students to their university. The PBSA sector needs universities who are going to attract students to go and study at their university that aren't in the local community. So they want to have good quality accommodation to do that. And they've both got data that is going to support each other in achieving their goals. And we need to be sharing it and we need to be utilising it. And it's all part of, and local authorities need that data, because local authorities need to be able to plan their local housing plans. So I just think it comes back down to, are we using enough data? Pretty much no, I don't think we are. We're not even using the data that is there, let alone trying to get new data. Do we need more data? Yes. Are we all working to achieve the same aim? Yes. So let's work together and collaborate and utilise that so we can have a strategic plan for homes for students.
I think the elephant in the room is back to Laura Matthews' question about staff. I don't think there's the resource to do this properly in most organisations. Who does it sit with? Because, is there a data analyst? Is there an intel person? No, there isn't. So, are acquisitions doing it at the point that they're buying a piece of land or buying a property? No, probably not. Are they taking the word from the agents? Probably yes, who will spin it to suit them. And then once the property's bought, the marketing team aren't doing that research generally, because they don't have the time and the resource and the money to do it. There is data out there as well that costs money. It's well worth it, in my opinion, but we know that many operators and asset managers are not paying for that data. So they're scraping together people and a bit of resource and a bit of data, and that's probably not being cascaded down. The people that really know what's happening are the people that work within the property. They'll know exactly who's coming in to do viewings. They'll know when the patterns have shifted and no one's listening to them. So like Dini said, it's collaborative, but it's collaborative at all levels. I think the question from Dave is bang on. It is confusing. I'll be honest with you. When we're doing research for clients and we're doing audits, there's so much data. And it's from all different places, and it takes time and it takes money. So yeah, if people are serious about adapting their product and their service and their marketing to that market at that particular time, then they've got to invest.
I agree. But you can't, this is the thing. You can outsource this. You can get, go and get Dave to have a look at Nottingham University. How's that doing? What's the latest there? Dave will have those conversations. He will analyze all of the current data. He will probably even do freedom of information requests, which I've done in the past, and that's been the only way to get accurate data out of a university. And I think that's one of the key things, that the data just simply isn't there. But cutting through that data and analysing it, that's the next step, and that's what I don't think we're doing a good enough job of. And I think that UCAS providing October data, and I'll be honest, UCAS are doing a way better job than they ever have of releasing data that is going to be useful to the sector. And yes, of course, some of that data is chargeable. You have student crowds, stu rents, price hubble. There's various others too, but those are the key kind of data sources that we're looking at, as well as the sales agents' data as well. The likes of CBRE, Cushman, JLL, Savills, etc. They have Colliers. They do have data. But, do bear in mind that they are going to be trying to sell something off the back of it as well most of the time.
Great. Well, I think we've got time for one more question. So I'm going to dig into my trusty hat, and I have the name of Fatih Mahmood. So our good friend Fatih has been great at giving us some difficult questions over the last year. So what has he got for us today, Dan?
So here we go.
We know there are pockets of oversupply in many cities out there. To solve the housing crisis, is it time for all PBSA to receive blanket co-living designation or planning? And would that help with the housing crisis?
What an absolute belter of a question. So that's Fatty from Aparto, very well thought of within the industry. And I think that PBSA is a disadvantage at the moment compared to BTR, especially when BTR has these voluntary caps whereby they will limit the number of students internally that they will take. That may sit at 10%, it may sit at 50%. There may not be a cap at all if your property is specifically underoccupied or in a challenging market. So yeah, PBSA right now is disadvantaged in the planning environment, but that doesn't mean that you should just pivot to BTR or co-living. And I think that that's because they are very different skill sets in terms of managing it, different return profiles, different yields. And I think that that's where there does need to be a lot more forethought from the planning regime as to the differentiators between co-living, PBSA or BTR, or we scrap it all and say it's a free-for-all. Everybody can go after students, no caps in place. Planning don't put any caps on students in BTR or co-living. And everybody can just make sure that they are trying to put the residents in the right properties at the right price and keep the residents happy. And we become this homogenous shared living sector. And that's almost what we're seeing now, apart from PBSA is at the biggest disadvantage there. What do you guys think?
Well, I kind of had this thought when we were at Property Week, and I think Joss was on stage kind of saying it can't be built because we can't get the returns. And it's kind of like, well, hang on, in a world where people are willing to build something and we need houses for people, let people build and don't restrict them into what they build. And from a sustainability point of view, actually, in a way, this segmentation isn't helping us, because if you can just build homes for people that people want to live in, they can be used for all that time. If you build, you know, we've already said in this episode that PBSA generally builds these institutionalized buildings that don't really feel like home, that you aren't going to get families living them, you aren't going to get groups of friends living them from all walks of life. So therefore they become a redundant building when they can no longer be used for student. So really, from a sustainability point of view, that isn't helping anyone. So I think that we do need to come round to a point of view that we need to build homes. There's different ways to segment those homes, but let's give a degree of flexibility so that we are making the best choices for longevity in these communities and these businesses and these buildings.
I think what you have to remember as well is that you could take away PBSA consent and make everything co-living. It doesn't mean that you have to take non-students. So, you know, for the likes of, I don't know, Unite and IQ, they're probably, you know, always just going to have students in their building, and that's absolutely fine. But it does give the flexibility that if a market changes, that they can adapt quickly and provide homes for people that need it. I think there's other, you know, restrictions around the design and the build that is impacting PBSA, putting them at a disadvantage compared to BTR and co-living. We discussed that a little while earlier about, you know, fire safety and, you know, the way that windows open and desks can't be put here, there and everywhere. You know, there's a lot of restrictions, you know, that the code means that you have to have a certain amount of worktop space, a certain amount of ovens, a certain amount of fridges, etc. So I think it would free up the architects to design things with a bit more freedom if they knew that there was the freedom to do it as there is in co-living and BTR. I was going to say I agree with Fatty. He didn't make it clear what his view is on it. It was a question to us. But, you know, I think co-living planning would help with the housing crisis.
That's great. Well, that was a lot of fun. I enjoyed that, and I'm pretty sure you guys did too. But thanks everyone for all your contributions. We really do appreciate it. There's some brilliant questions there, and I know we've got some more brilliant questions after Christmas when you come back and listen. And we just want to say a big thank you from all three of us for listening loyally every week throughout 2024. We do really appreciate your ongoing support and for listening and coming back week after week, because we only put this out if you guys are listening and you're getting value from it. So a big thank you from all of us. As we said, we'll be kicking off 2025 with part 2 of this special Q&A takeover before launching into a brand new season of House in January. Thank you once again to our headline sponsor, My Student Halls, for sponsoring this series. Please like, subscribe and share so we can reach as wide an audience as possible and keep bringing you this weekly digest. We will see you in a couple of weeks. And a big season's greetings to all of you. Whether or not you celebrate this time of year, hopefully you'll be spending some time with loved ones.